get started. So I hereby call this meeting to order at 12 p.m. Notice is hereby given of a regular meeting of the Animal Shelter Advisory Committee of the City of San Angelo to be held on October 20th, 2022 at 12 p.m. at City Hall, East Mezzanine, 72 West College Avenue, San Angelo, Texas, for the purposes of considering the following agenda items. 1, call to order. 2, public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium. Begin by stating their name and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Committee members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The committee takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Do we have any public comment?
Okay, my name is Mary Roberts. I am very concerned and disturbed by all the things that have been happening at the animal shelter. We were told the animals were poisoned, and the shelter reached out and asked people to help with donation of food. And I think I earned my place because I brought 33 bags of 50-pound dogs' food to the shelter. But what concerns me the most is that the animals were poisoned. Police investigation was supposed to be open, but now it's swept under the rug, okay? Number 2, the last thing was the horrible condition that the shelter was in, with feces, with animals having to live on top of the feces. And as far as I'm concerned, the manager, the director, or whoever hell it is, needs to be fired. Because if that person doesn't know what's going on in their own shelter, that tells me that person is not doing his or her job, okay? I have years ago, when we have a jackass manager named James Flores.
Please refrain from cussing. Thank you.
James Flores over the shelter. It was awful. Over 6,000 animals were euthanized a year. Euthanization is not a solution. Come up with ideas. Don't try to fix the problem at the end. Try to take care of the problem at the front. Enforce the ordinance about breeding, okay? Offer free spay and neuter. You may sound like a lot of money up front, but at the end, the city and the taxpayer are actually saving money because we're not having to vet a dog who's been there 3 years and feed the dog for 3 years and put the dog through such ordeal being in a shelter for 3 years. I know Paul's has established a building out there now, and I saw good things coming out of that partnership. They helped them to recognize, hey, let's try to do some transporting, which the shelter did not do anything like that in the past. They were just doing whatever they do. And my concern is, what are the people at the shelter doing? If the dogs are living on top of the feces, are they not cleaning? And if they're not, what are we paying them to do? Okay? So what I would like to encourage the shelter or this committee to really seriously think about, let's address the problem up front. It doesn't make sense to do it at the end. No different than putting a person in prison, feed, vet them for whatever time. If we could take care of the problem up front, I can tell you on Facebook, I see people say animals for rehoming, and they're charging $300-400. Why don't you guys put a group to overlook some of the stuff that's happening in our local community and maybe try to address it instead of, well, we got another animal and we don't have room, we can do more intake, and we have to euthanize. And I know that has to happen when you run out of space, but you can help address the problem up front, like the rescue are doing. I think all of the local rescue are doing your job, because they're the one who's offering spay and neuter. That's it. Hey.
Can I make any comment on that? Okay.
Hi, my name is Jatan Giese. I'm with District 5. I just wanted to encourage that when y'all go to report to City Council that y'all will request that they find the funds for the spay neuter and find the funds for another code enforcement person to go out and to enforce the code for the spay neuter ordinance. Also, we had, some of the rescues had met with Michael Dane. We had asked about how they were enforcing it, and I'd suggested that they actually hand out the citation when the people pick the dogs up at the animal shelter. And when they, instead of y'all chasing them, it becomes valid after 30 days or however long y'all give them. It becomes valid if they don't prove that they've had the dog spayed or neutered. I know that it would be a problem for somebody to know that they're going to have fines when they get there. I know people will just quit picking their dogs up, and they'll just get a free one at the next event. But if it's just given as a citation before they even leave, I would encourage that. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Sharon Hoffman. I, too, want to address the conditions at the shelter that I observed myself right at the end of August this year. I've been going to the shelter since it was on Bay Street, and I've never seen anything like that. We get involved with hoarding situations all the time, and if I saw that hoarding situation in the public, I would be calling the authorities in. That was not a 1 day or a 2 day or a 1 week or a 2 week accumulation of feces and filth. It was an ongoing problem. So when I hear people on the news, Morgan, saying that it was just a very temporary thing, that is absolutely not true. That doesn't happen quickly. So I'm very concerned about the condition of the animals at the shelter, about the lack of care for the animals. I understand you don't have enough cleaners. I get it. Something has to change. And that condition, the pictures that were on Facebook were just a small part of what we saw that day. I didn't take them, but I saw what the person who took them saw. It was actually much worse than the photos showed. If those conditions can happen out there, then somebody needs to be held accountable. Somebody who was in charge out there, somebody who had something to do with those animals needs to be held accountable. I don't have an answer for all of this. Certainly enforcing the spay and neuter ordinance would be a good start. But I was horrified. I continue to be horrified. I've never seen anything like that, ever. And that's something that nobody should put up with. Nobody.
All right. So go ahead and call for, I guess that's in the public comment. Is there any other further public comment? Okay. So as far as that public comment goes, is there anything that we wish to add to a further agenda potentially as far as that goes? I'd be more than happy to suggest that we can always give you a report on if that funding through the city, if that is even possible to fund a free spay neuter program. I don't know if that is a option through our city. That would be something for the finance department to have to answer, to be quite honest with you. So we can request them to get back to us on that if you'd like. As far as the other items, we can go through and do a report on that. I already know that some of those items have been started being addressed and are currently being improved as well. If there's no further comment or public agenda on that part, we'll go ahead and go to the consent agenda and enter our regular meeting. Yeah, come up to the podium. Can't ask from the audience. Sorry about that.
I have this, Jatan Giese, District 5. I have one last question. As board members of this board, I think that y'all are required to go out there once a month. Is that how often? To tour the shelter? And is that what's on y'all's bylaws?
We can't actually converse on that. this can't be a two-way conversation.
Okay,
This
okay.
has to be an agenda item. It's on
Okay,
our training.
well,
on
I
that.
just.
So I'm sorry I can't do that for
That's
you.
fine. I saw that that was what was supposed to be on there, on the bylaws, that it was either once a month or once every other month. And I was just curious.
I'm sorry, I
Encouraging,
can't.
no, I know, I'm
Yeah.
encouraging y'all that, make sure that y'all are doing that, going out there at least once a month or once every 2 months, however, whatever the bylaws say for this board, to see what's going on and maybe keep abreast more of how bad it's gotten and how, it didn't happen just in a day or two. And just encouraging y'all to make sure that you're following up on that as required. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and enter our regular agenda meeting, go to our consent agenda. So I guess from here, we just turn it over to get that started, right? Yes. I'm sorry about this. I'm not the typical chairperson on this part. Consent agenda, item A, consider approving August 18th, 2022 Animal Shelter Advisory Committee regular meeting minutes. All in favor? All right. I'll entertain the motion to have a second. All right. Item approved. Moving on to our regular item, subsection A, discussion and possible action related to monthly shelter numbers for August 2022. And then we'll also continue on through the discussion of the shelter numbers for September 2022, and go on from there as we go.
So for August 2022, we did have 337 new arrivals during that time period. We were closed the last day of August for our pest control treatment. During that time period, 111 animals were adopted, 114 were transferred out, and 74 were redeemed by owner. We did have an increased uptick in our response to wildlife, with 56 animals released in that way, and 69 animals were either euthanized or died in custody. And so that left 386 animals on the premises. So for the month of August, 83% of our animals were released alive. Of the 69 animals that died, 53 were cats, 13 were dogs, and 3 were other. We had some livestock, wildlife that were injured and could not be released, and no rehabber was available. For the 53 cats that died, we did continue to fight a panleukopenia outbreak at the shelter, and so that is the majority of that activity there. So you'll see that another way to break down the animals that died, 58 were sick or injured, and 11 were aggressive dogs. You can accept public comment on this specific agenda item now.
Is there any comment on item A with regard to August of 2022 shelter numbers? If so, please come to the mic. And we will gladly answer questions at the end of the each item agenda, just for future reference for the people in the audience. Thank you.
So for the next agenda item, September 2022 performance, we did have a number of, we had more animals that left than arrived, so that a significant portion, almost 100 animals net reduction in our shelter population. So we had 241 animals arrive, so our intake was quite low for September as we continued to communicate with the public our space crisis that we were experiencing. We did have 120 animals adopted, so a little bit higher than usual. 55 were transferred to rescue, 68 were redeemed by owner, 34 were wildlife released, and only 6 deceased. So we ended the year strong with almost 98% of our animals for that month released alive. Of the 6 animals that died, it's an even breakdown between cats, dogs, and other. We had an injured deer as well as an injured, I believe, porcupine that did have to be euthanized in the field by animal services officers. So 4 of the animals that died were either sick or injured, and 2 were aggressive dogs.
All right. Is there any questions or comment on the September 2022 shelter numbers? Okay, moving on to agenda item C, discussion and possible action related to annual shelter numbers for fiscal year 2021 to 2022.
So for the fiscal year just ended, 22, we had 4,034 animals arrive. We did continue to work coordinated intake measures, but the vast majority of that new arrival decrease from 21 to 22 was livestock. We took in about 200 fewer livestock this year than last year. It was just a tough year economically, and fewer people were carrying livestock. So in turn, we had fewer responses for estray livestock. So our cat intake was flat year over year. So we continue to, of course, work our community cat programming. And then so the vast majority of that intake was canines. We had almost 1,200 animals adopted, so that is up from prior years, and a really great response from the community late in the fiscal year in August and September as we shared our need for support. Almost 1,000 animals redeemed by their owner. That is down from the prior year. So we are seeing families, you know, that have less resources to really care for and maintain ownership of their pets. 344 wildlife released, almost exactly the same as the prior year, 614 deceased. So we had 85% live release rate for fiscal year 22. That is, of course, a reduction from fiscal year 21's 90% status, but if we compare to fiscal year 20, where we were at 82%, we did outperform that year where we did have a lot of community support. Of the animals deceased, 400 were cats, 189 dogs, and 18 other. We do still continue to battle neonatal health in our cat nursery and do seek to rely on even more fosters and rescue transfers to take on that outside of a shelter environment to provide those vulnerable animals the care that they need. So another way to break down the animals that were deceased, 463 were sick or injured, and 151 were aggressive. Of course, all of that aggression column is canines. So another way to break down our 85% live release rate is that 28% of our animals were adopted. That's up from, I believe, 24% the prior year. 24% were returned to owner, which is down a little bit from the prior year. 8% wildlife released and 24% transfers out. So that leaves 15% of our animals were deceased, either euthanized or died in custody.
Any comment from anyone in regards to those numbers? Any questions or anything of that?
I do have a question. Of the ones that were deceased, there were numbers shown about aggressiveness, and so those were put down. But how many more were put down that did not fit that criteria, and it was euthanized, maybe due to space? Do you have that count?
For fiscal year 22, no animals were euthanized for space.
Say that again?
None. No animals
were euthanized.
for space.
Okay, good. That's good to know. My last question is, you hear us what we have to say, and so far I haven't heard what you guys are doing about it. And maybe I then give you a chance to say what your plans are. So I'm hoping that maybe you guys can tell us if you guys have any plans on the agenda or anything to help with addressing excessive animal coming into the shelter. I know you guys can help that. You know, because people bring them to you guys. And I understand they need to be euthanized when you don't have the space. But is there any plan or maybe trying to prevent that number from coming in? So I'd like to hear from you guys.
So for the public comment, we are required to, and of course, accept comments made by the public and can consider that for a future agenda item, but we're only allowed to discuss what's in the posted agenda by the Open Meetings Act. So we do have additional coordinated intake policies to consider at a future agenda item, which I think will speak to some of what you're requesting, but we're prohibited from just dialoguing about items that are not on the agenda.
Are the cats vaccinated for panleukopenia on intake?
Yes.
Then I don't understand the numbers of deaths related to that.
So, as far as in vaccination on that, as panleukopenia is typically going to be a young kitten disease, just as with dogs, dog parvo and panleukopenia are the same virus. If they have not received the full series of vaccinations, which if they're born in the shelter and they can only start vaccinating at 5 to 6 weeks old, and they do not receive full protective immunity from their vaccines until at least 16 weeks are old, actually according to the AVMA standard guidelines. During that time period in which they are on that, they're susceptible to being infected with panleukopenia, and that is how they can get that.
I understand that.
That's on
How
them.
many, that brings me to my next question, actually. How many births for kittens and puppies take place annually at the shelter? I don't mean intake of baby kittens or puppies. How many puppies and kittens are born there?
I don't have that information, but it is drastically less than it used to be.
It should be 0. Also,
If a dog comes in too advanced in her pregnancy, that's not something we,
how often does that happen?
That is not something that is
I don't-
honestly tracked, so we can look
it
at.
is tracked, but I don't have it with me to
I
speak to.
mean, in all honesty, we can't give you that number, but what we can do is we can look
Well,
at
if-
adding that to
if
the agenda
parvo
item in the
and-
future to discuss as that being added to a metric that will be reported.
If parvo and panleuk are such issues for kittens and puppies, and definitely they are, then I would think that fewer births in the shelter would be a certain thing to look for. How many of the live released animals released turn to owner are released intact?
I actually think that's in our next agenda item.
Okay, but then we can approach that later. And I have another question that maybe I'll talk about at the end, okay?
Any other comment or from board members or anybody?
Here we go, it's green. I actually, still learning as I'm going through these meetings. From the last meeting, we had that, trying to remember, the free microchip thing that we had in June, July, I believe, and stuff. So what type of devices, I really don't know, that are used to verify if there's a chip in an animal? How big are they? How are they portable?
They're very, very portable. Most of them are actually
The size, yeah.
either this size. There's one or two older ones that are a little bit bigger, about 1.5 sizes of cell phone. Most of them are actually smaller cell phones, about maybe a credit card size. So that's kind of the size they are. They can range in price from probably as low as $100 all the way up to a couple hundred, depending on what device you get. And most of the chips now are gone to a universal standard, which is easily read by all chip scanners.
Okay. Is that something that can be programmed into it, or is it a specific device that has to be bought for that purpose?
It is an RFID chip scanner. It's basically an RFID tag on underneath the skin. I do not believe there is a cell phone app available at all. I have not heard of it. I guarantee you if it was, there would be a lot of us having it on our phones because those chip scanners like to dive off the counter and break.
Right.
And then you cry a little bit because they're not cheap. But the scanners are very portable. They're very easy to use. They're all pretty much one button push. And then it gives you a unique number that you can go to the internet, microchiplookup.com. They'll tell you the manufacturer, then you call the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will give you the information off their database. The chips work great as long as they're registered. If they're implanted, but the owner is in charge of registering them, there is quite a few people that don't realize that at some of the clinics. I believe the microchip clinic at the shelter, we registered those, correct?
Yes.
So the microchip information is at least current. If the owner moves or changes their phone number and doesn't update their microchip information, which only costs $13 to $18 at the highest from the ones that I've dealt with, then that's when you lose the ability to usually recontact the owner. So overall, very easy to use, easy to distribute.
Well, I'm kind of leading into this, because I've been thinking about that since the last meeting.
Sure.
Based on where I work at. So I'm just trying to gather some information before making a proposal to it. How long is the process from scanning it to receiving the owner contact information? You were saying that it was a step to go through the manufacturer and,
It's a live database.
Yeah.
So the scanners we buy are about $40, and we had talked in the past about having like one on each shift for patrol, one at each fire station. For found pets, citizens can just go by a fire station and have a pet scanned, since those are, already in the neighborhood and essentially open 24 hours a day when we are not, but also having them on hand for law enforcement. So they're quite affordable, the ones that we're buying, and quite reliable. It's a live database online, so it's no time. It's just the expertise to log in, to make those phone calls, the few minutes it takes to do that. So it's something we absolutely could explore to get to our first responders and our folks that are in the field all the time.
well, that was the information from the last meeting. That usually a lot of dogs or animals that are located, called in for first responder response and stuff is high percentage of belonging in that area.
Right.
Of where the animal's found, instead of having a resource officer or animal control officer to come out, take them to the pound and so forth. So that's just one thing I was thinking. I've never heard what you said about proposing it to the first responders organizations, but that was something I was looking into, maybe sending up to our admin to see if we could have one per shift or assigned to supervisors or something, so.
And also, there's usually, if you're, the chips is implanted by the city, since they're implanted by the city, that database can be accessed and searched. If you're not implanting those microchips, sometimes you have to do a chat log or call and leave a microchip number, and they'll get back to you. But either way is a little bit less, you don't have to always listen to the awful hold music now. It's gotten a little bit better.
She can come
Sure,
make comment.
yeah. There's just certain things, I just try to make sure we follow the rules
I
on.
had some input. My name's
That's fine.
John Geezy, District 5. With the microchips, once I do go out and scan dogs on my own. When y'all implant chips through the city or through PAWS, do y'all register them for them, or do they have to register them themselves?
We register them.
You register them, okay. And so when you're talking about calling them in, are you talking about calling in to the chip company or to the city?
To the chip, if it's law enforcement after hours, they would be calling into the chip company, and if it's our chip, they have access, that chip company has access to our records.
Okay. I'll tell you, when I go scan a dog, from the time I get the call to the time I actually get a hold of somebody, it is no less than an hour. I get out there, scan the dog. If they got a chip, I have to go on a microchip lookup to see what company it's registered, because there's many of them. Then you can call them, and some of them will have privacy holds on them. I hope that y'all put privacy hold on y'all?
So for general public, such as yourself, I'm not going to go too further than this just because I don't know if it's going off topic too much. But as far as microchips go, if a general public person calls that's not a certified rescue organization, city organization, or veterinary office, they typically will not give
Right.
out any of that information, especially
If they-
privacy hold. Now, they will give it to us, but we're not allowed to release it because.
Well, and as a representative of rescue, I can get the information on it. I've also, something else that I've done is I've printed up some cards that have a place for the microchip number, the website they can look up, and then they can go on, and then I encourage them to call me back. If they're not able to, if it's a privacy hold, you go ahead and leave a report, and the company will report to the person. But that's something also that you could look at. I know that, we used to have Southside Vet that would scan the dogs, and they no longer do that. It turns into too much. and maybe considering putting some cards that y'all have that you can just put the microchip on the website, that you can look up the number to see what company it's with, because it'll automatically give you that phone number, and then maybe the people can do that. Because I know sometimes you just don't have an hour to stand there and do that, because it does take a little bit, even if you have access, like, to go over the privacy holes. But it's no less than an hour, and that's what I was going to say, is that when y'all do a realistic financial comparison of what it takes to deal with the dogs that are out versus just spay or neutering them or giving the vouchers, if you do a financial comparison for the city, I hope that y'all will realize that it's an hour of a animal control officer to stand there and do that, even if they're chipped and everything's done correctly. Thank you.
So definitely something we can add to a future agenda item and ask for some further information. But we'll have to look at that at a later date. So I guess with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to section item D, discussion of possible action related to enforcement of the local requirement for spay neuter of cats and dogs. And I'll turn that over to Morgan.
So for this one, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but just to update y'all that, of course, the State Health Code 828 does govern that all adopted pets have to be spay-neutered, or the adopter has to sign a sterilization agreement. We are compliant with that and do contract with PAWS to do that, and then, of course, follow up that each animal is spayed-neutered, and in the event that there is a failure, we do pursue a process to gain compliance and get the animal back in for that procedure. But we do have some updates related to the responsibility for owners to spay neuter their pet. That local ordinance 3.01.012 mandates that all cat and dog owners must spay neuter their pet, just any pet over 4 months of age, and that is their responsibility at their expense to do that. And so certainly an animal that we interact with, that we impound, either it was running loose or a citizen found it running loose and brought it in, whether that's brought in by animal services officer or citizen, now we've got a pet on the premises, very likely that it's unaltered, and do want to make that owner aware that they need to take that necessary action. There are some exceptions. They're few and far between. And so, for example, if the pet is medically fragile and not recommended to undergo surgery, that's something we certainly just ask for documentation from a vet to support that. That, of course, is an appropriate exemption. Also, any law enforcement canines are not required to be spay-neutered. If it is a registered, like AKC show dog, that would not be required to be spay-neutered. A few exemptions like that. Citizens may also seek a breeder's permit if they are undergoing that activity and don't want to spay-neuter their pets, which is a permitted activity through our planning department that they pay an annual fee to do. So those exemptions, like I mentioned, are few and far between. So the vast majority of owners do need to make that investment in the long-term health of their pet, or be subject to citations. When I first started, our return to owner rate was well under 5%, was quite low, and so we wanted to ramp up those pets going back to their owners, and we wanted to inform people on the law and to refer them to low-cost services to get their pets spay-neutered. We'd prefer that pet owners avoid court fees and instead make that investment in their pet, and we would follow up and ask for that proof and write a citation if no progress had been made. But since fiscal year 22 in particular, our canines under 6 months of age increased 27% year over year. We knew that we needed to make some changes to the way that we enforce that process. And so we, of course, are citing more on first interaction if someone's just unwilling to participate, or if we have seen the pet before and of course have given that deadline to spay-neuter. but what we have launched with our city attorney's office is a filing through the municipal court, and we're working through a 24-month backlog right now of the number of pets that were released unaltered, did not provide any of these exemptions, did not provide any proof of spay-neuter, and to go ahead and file on them like a citation, like a violation of the ordinance, and they have to appear before the court with that information. And of course, it's possible that they did spay-neuter their pet and just didn't inform us, and in that scenario, they certainly can just present that proof to the court and prove that they have that compliance. So for fiscal year 22, as an example, we released 956 cats and dogs to their owner. You'll see I reported a higher number of return to owners, but that included other species. This spay-neuter ordinance only applies to cats and dogs. So if somebody is claiming their goat or claiming their ferret, that is not a requirement under this ordinance to spay-neuter. So of the 956 cats and dogs that were returned to owner in fiscal year 22, we are still actively working through 671 of them are unaltered. And so that is part of that backlog of what we're filing on. We do know a number of those pets, either the owner moved out of town and are no longer subject to this ordinance, or the pet was subsequently euthanized, or some other reason why, or they have been cited. So there's a number of those 671 that we do have some activity on, but they are still going to report in the system as an unaltered pet returned to owner. So that's where we are. We really want to encourage folks to take advantage of low-cost options, but in the event that they don't or don't keep us updated of their status, we are undergoing this additional process.
So what is the, because it's been a while since I actually looked this up, what is the fee or fine, more specifically for not spaying and neutering your animal?
It's a fee assessed by the municipal court, and I don't know that I have their latest fee structure and what all is involved in that. A citizen can plead guilty, not guilty, or no contest. They can come and provide proof of the spay-neuter and potentially have it dismissed. At that point, it's kind of out of our hands. If it's similar to a Class C misdemeanor, like a speeding ticket, that's a couple $100 in fees and court costs. But it doesn't necessarily make it to that level. We have had citizens who blatantly have said, I'm not going to spay neuter my pet. I'll happily plead guilty and pay the court costs. And in that sense, I'm sure they're assessed, that fine of probably $200 in that neighborhood. But the vast majority of citizens are it's not their desire to keep an unaltered pet. They just need to prioritize it and either make that investment through a private vet clinic or take advantage of low-cost options. It's not been prioritized in the competing demands of the last couple years.
Very much so. It's definitely, there's been some other backlogs of other things, unfortunately, in the municipal courts and criminal courts that have been backlogged due to the pandemic. So,
and what we're dealing with here are just our families. The vast majority of our pets returned to owner are your average middle class family. It's not their intention to actively breed their mixed breed terrier. It's just that the other things have been a priority. And we're at a point now where we need to and have communicated that it's got to become a priority at some point, and that point is now.
Yes, and very much so. And it's just, it's not that these are, like you said, these are not bad people, these are not uncaring people, these are people that are making choices based off what's the most high priority for their family. And unfortunately, sometimes that puts the pet care in the backseat. And then as far as the breeding permit goes, what is that cost? And I know that I think that it's required for it to be in, I'd heard at one point, and this was probably 3 or 4 years ago plus, and I kind of never really retouched on it and haven't looked it up a little since, but is the breeding permit required to be in an industrial area because that's considered a business? Or is that a breeding permit that someone can ever get in their private home? Because if we're not having a list of the breeding permits because people are not deciding to not get the permit because they're unable to achieve it because the code does not allow it to be at a private residence, that could also be an issue for being unable to track what's being bred in town and maintaining a better record if we're just having a problem because the code enforcement has it zoned in a different zone.
Yeah, our breeders' permits do go to the planning department for review, and there's a number of choices the applicant can make in their process. I think we have a separate ordinance that states that the owner must reside on the premises with the pet. So if you are in an industrial area and housing your dog that you're breeding, it's probably in violation of that ordinance, right? Like in the city of San Angelo, your pet needs to live in the home with you. It is disallowed to have like a shop dog, a warehouse dog, a guard dog at a premises. These are we identify them as pets that need to be in a home environment. So if you do have a pet in a home environment and you're zoned RS1, the average, residential neighborhood, I do believe it's a disallowed home business. So if you're doing as a for-profit business, it'll probably be denied because of that. If you're doing it, there's an option you can pick called like for personal use, and it's just, I love the breed, I love my dog, I'm going to keep them unaltered, but only to, give to my friends and family and whatever's involved in that. And that would probably, so as far as what else reviewed by the planning department, I can get y'all more information. But yeah, in your average residential home, you could not be running a for-profit breeding operation.
And maybe that might be one of the reasons why we have pretty much really no breeding permits issued. So maybe looking at having a agenda item on that and seeing if that is something that could be changed. It's not that I really want to see, 400, 500 breeders in the town. That's definitely not my goal of this conversation. But if we are going to have a breeding permit, if it's not attainable and it basically makes you in violation, then for me, that breeding permit is nothing but a trap. So that's kind of one of those things where if it's truly what they're doing and it's truly what they are, they should have at least a legal avenue to do that, especially for dogs that are, there are some people that do it for the love of the breed. But as a whole, though, I find that it would at least give us a better idea of maybe using a different metric and having a city be able to use those funds to help with other items as well. So just be something to look at and go from there. But it's just, it just seems like that is it's just not something that's a fair ordinance if we can't allow it to ever be used.
Yeah, it does seem like there are a number of other things governing it that our section of the ordinance can't speak to. So I can get y'all some more information, and then if after you review that, still want a future agenda item, we can talk about that.
Sure.
Can I ask a question about the permit?
You have to come to the front, please.
Okay, from what I understand, I may be incorrect, but my understanding is to get a permit to breed is $100. And I can tell you that at least 7 different people on Facebook selling puppies, and it's about 8 per litter, $500, that's $4,000. Okay, I think we need to increase the price of a permit so that the true breeder, if they are a true breeder, they would be willing to pay. A true breeder don't just sell the puppy when they turn 8 weeks old. They make sure the baby is healthy. And as far as I know, a friend of mine just bought 2 puppies, miniature Yorkie, and they even gave her a 1-year health check. Should anything happen to those 2 puppies during the first year, they will either reimburse her or provide her another puppy. I don't know if you guys have enough staff to just kind of look over Facebook. I mean, I just happened to stumble across one, and they say, home fee, $500. I got 8 to choose from. Don't tell me that's not a breeder, okay? They're not actually keeping it for themselves, than to breed more puppies for their own use. They are definitely selling puppies. And I don't know if it's something worth looking into, and
I think that's actually what the ordinance will be looking into as far as the breeding part, and also the fee part is not necessarily something that we may have control over. So that's gonna be something we're gonna have to really put on an agenda item to get more information before we really can continue the
so
conversation.
would it get on your agenda then?
We're gonna put it out to get information and see if that ordinance, because it involves economic, is within our purview, because certain things are not completely within our purview.
Well, as far as economic, I'm glad you brought it up. If you were to increase the price and fine people, I mean, wouldn't that generate revenue?
To a certain extent, go ahead. I don't think I can answer that in this setting because it's not a true agenda item.
Okay, so how many people would it take to get an item on the agenda? How many votes?
I think the commitment right now is to provide additional background to the committee and let them feedback. Our bylaws state that an agenda item can be placed by, I think, the chairperson at any time, or 2 members of the committee at any time.
I mean, what, city councilmen? Who are these people?
These committee
Oh,
members.
so this is it, right here?
We have 7 committee members, 4 in attendance today.
Okay, all right.
All right, do we have any other comment from anyone else? Do you have any of the,
I'm not sure about the process for issuing citations. Does the animal control officers actually issue the citations, or who issues citations that are for animals that are not in compliance with the spay-neuter ordinance?
Yes, it's animal services
control
officers.
Do you know how many of those citations were issued in the last year?
I think we're at 100-ish for complaints filed and citations issued as we work through this backlog.
Okay, and so 2/3 of the animals that were released unaltered are still, as far as you know, unaltered. So 671 of 956, or that's not quite, but roughly 2/3. So that would suggest to me that something different needs to be done. You can maybe get through how long will it take to get through the backlog? I mean, that's
Yeah.
a large number.
Yeah, if I may address that, one of the things that she said, to me, I was kind of trying to listen. She's got a very soft voice. I don't know if you heard it back there. One of the things moving forward is that they're going to be mailing the citations.
I realize that.
Okay.
I've heard that too.
But they're 2 years backlogged.
Right.
But the other thing is that out of that 2/3 total, there's also exceptions that either people have moved off,
Right.
the dog has died, or anything like that.
That's why I said, as far as you know, they're unaltered, so
Right.
it may be. So relatively low, quite low number of citations then, compared to the number of unaltered animals in San Angelo. This is going this is not on your agenda item, but it's a question I would like to ask. Apparently now, the shelter is going to have a lower number of animals that can stay there, right? 125 or whatever it's going to be. If that date is November the 1st, what steps are you taking to get to those numbers?
That's not on today's agenda, so we couldn't
know
speak
it's
to
not.
it, but it has been published.
Okay, but on your last numbers, it was several hundred. It was way more than the 125. So is it possible that you will get there by November the 1st?
I really can't speak to the capacity. It's not on
Okay.
today's agenda.
Okay. It seems to me like the compliance with the spay-neuter ordinance is something that has been just pushed to the back burner for a long time, and I don't see that it's going to, I would like to see that it's going to become more important and that steps will be made to comply with that. I think everybody in San Angelo would like to see that. I'm just not sure that we will. Another thing, the burst in the shelter, let's go back to that, please.
if you're going backwards on the item,
Yeah.
you can't do that. It
Well,
must
that's
be irrelevant to
unfortunate.
this one.
But there's no reason to allow kittens and puppies to be born there with Panluke and Parvo and whatever else is just endemic there. That's something that I think you should certainly consider.
Also, there are quite a few young puppies and kittens dropped off.
And so when I originally
Yeah,
asked
all right.
that, I did not specifically excluded them.
Okay. Okay, so I think that ends that agenda item. So we're going to go to follow-up and administrative issues on number 5, going to section A, discussion and possible action related to 2023 meeting dates.
I've proposed before the committee today to go ahead and set our 2023 calendar. We're looking at meeting we are required by state law to meet 3 times annually. We, of course, can meet more frequently than that. For 2023, I propose we meet 4 times, the 3rd Thursday in January, April, August, and October. So that lets us report after the end of almost every quarter for quarterly reports of performance, but also to consider any future agenda items. And of course, the chairperson can call a meeting at any time if necessary. But just for planning purposes, to be able to loop in civic events for the reservation of the room and start building out our agenda items for the future year, that is my recommendation, is the dates listed in y'all's background.
Do you have a motion to approve those dates for future meetings? All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, item approved. And I guess that brings us to item 6, which is adjournment. Do you have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion.
All right, do I have a second? All right, this meeting is adjourned at 12:52. October 10th, or October 20th, 2022.